The deputy leaned against his cruiser and looked the old man up and down. Torn jacket, dirt under his nails, a duffel bag that smelled like rain and old canvas. "You're telling me you own the Merrick cabin?" The old man nodded once. The deputy smirked. "That place has been sealed for 30 years. You got proof?" The old man pulled a folded letter from his coat. "State seal, legal language, transfer of deed." The deputy read it twice, then handed it back without a word. He got in his car and drove off. The old man stood on the gravel road alone. He looked up at the mountain, pine trees thick as walls, no power lines, no cell towers. He adjusted the strap on his duffel and started walking. His name was Thomas Vance, 68 years old. Gray beard, deep-set eyes, hands that didn't shake. For 3 years he'd slept in shelters, under bridges, and in the corners of bus stations. No one asked his name. No one looked twice. He never asked for anything. He just moved through the world like smoke. The inheritance letter came to a VA office in Spokane. A clerk tracked him down at a church meal program. "Says here your uncle left you property, a cabin, up near Coldwater Ridge." Thomas took the letter, read it standing up. He folded it carefully and put it in his pocket. "Thank you," he said. The clerk waited for more, maybe excitement, maybe questions. Thomas just walked out. The road up the mountain was barely a road. Gravel turned to mud. Mud turned to dirt and root. He walked for 4 hours. His boots were worn through at the heel, but his stride never changed. Steady, controlled. He stopped once, not to rest, to listen. Wind through the trees, a hawk somewhere high, the distant trickle of snowmelt. He closed his eyes. For a moment he was somewhere else, somewhere hot, where the wind carried dust instead of pine. Then he opened his eyes and kept walking. The cabin sat in a clearing surrounded by old-growth forest, logs dark with age, roof sagging on one side, windows intact but filmed with dirt. A chain and padlock hung from the door. Thomas pulled a key from the envelope. It was rusty, but it fit. The lock opened with a soft click. He pushed the door inward. The air inside was cold and stale. Dust hung in the light from the doorway. A wooden table, 2 chairs, a stone fireplace, shelves lined with jars and cans decades old. Everything untouched. He set his duffel on the floor and walked to the window. The view stretched for miles, valley below, ridge after ridge of trees, no roads, no houses. He stood there for a long time. Then he turned and started unpacking. 3 days later, a truck came up the trail. Thomas heard it long before it arrived, engine grinding in low gear, tires slipping on loose rock. He was outside splitting wood when the truck pulled into the clearing. 2 men got out, rifles slung over their shoulders, camouflage jackets, boots caked in mud. The driver was broad, thick neck, sunglasses even though it was overcast. The other one was younger, thinner. He had a red beard and a nervous way of moving. The driver walked forward, stopped 10 feet from Thomas. "You the guy squatting here?" Thomas set the axe down. "I'm the owner." The driver looked at the cabin, then back at Thomas. "This is Merrick land. Been hunting here for 15 years. "Not anymore," Thomas said. The driver's jaw tightened. "We got permission from the county, standing agreement. That ended when the deed transferred." The younger man stepped forward. "We drove 3 hours to get here." Thomas didn't answer. The driver pulled his sunglasses off. His eyes were cold. "You really want to do this, old man?" Thomas met his gaze. "You can turn around or you can walk off. Either way, you're leaving." The younger man looked at the driver. "Come on, Dale, it's not worth it." Dale didn't move. He stared at Thomas like he was measuring him. Then he spat into the dirt. "This isn't over." He got back in the truck. The younger man followed. The engine started, tires spun, gravel sprayed. They disappeared down the trail. Thomas picked up the axe and went back to work. That night he sat by the fireplace, flames low, shadows moving on the walls. He'd found a box under the floorboards, papers inside, letters addressed to his uncle, old survey maps, a journal. He opened the journal carefully. The handwriting was tight and slanted, dates going back 40 years. His uncle had been a ranger, worked these mountains before the Park Service took over. There were notes about trails, wildlife, weather patterns. And something else. A section near the back, no dates, just entries. Hunters again, found 3 gut piles left on the ridge, no respect. Heard shots after dark, spotlighting, took their plates down. Talked to the sheriff, he said he'd handle it, he won't. The last entry was short. They don't understand what this place is. Maybe they never will. Thomas closed the journal. He stared into the fire. The next morning, he walked the property line. It took hours. The land stretched farther than he'd expected. Old boundary markers were still there. Stones stacked in cairns. Blazes cut into tree trunks, faded but visible. He found a trail on the north side. Fresh boot prints in the soft earth. He followed them. They led to a clearing a quarter-mile in. Tire tracks, empty beer cans, spent shotgun shells scattered in the dirt. A deer carcass lay in the brush, half butchered, left to rot. Thomas crouched beside it. Flies had already started. He stayed there for a minute, not moving. Then he stood and walked back to the cabin. The truck came back 2 days later. This time there were 3 of them. Dale, the younger man, and a third, older, thick gray mustache. He carried himself like someone used to being listened to. Thomas was on the porch. He just finished nailing a new board over a rotted step. Dale got out first, brought someone to talk sense into you. The older man stepped forward. He had a sheriff's badge clipped to his belt. "Name's Voller," he said. "I'm with county enforcement." Thomas set the hammer down. Voller looked around. "Nice place, quiet." "It is," Thomas said. "These boys tell me there's been some confusion about access rights." "No confusion," Thomas said. "I own it, they don't." Voller smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Look, I get it. New owner, want to put your stamp on things. But these men have been hunting here for years. It's tradition." "Tradition doesn't mean permission." Dale stepped forward. "We've got every right to be here." Thomas didn't look at him. He kept his eyes on Voller. Voller sighed. "Let me be straight with you. These mountains are big. Lot of ways to get hurt out here. Lot of ways things can go wrong. Be a shame if something happened." Thomas didn't blink. "Is that a threat?" Voller spread his hands. "Just stating facts." The silence stretched. Then Thomas spoke. "You can leave now." Voller's smile faded. "You really want to make enemies over this?" "I don't want anything," Thomas said, "but I'm staying." Voller stared at him. Then he shook his head and turned back to the truck. Dale lingered. "You're making a mistake." Thomas picked up the hammer. They left. That night Thomas didn't sleep. He sat in the dark cabin. No fire, no light. He listened. At 2 in the morning he heard it, the faint sound of an engine, far off, then silence. He moved to the window. Nothing visible, just darkness and trees. He waited. 20 minutes later he saw the glow, a flashlight beam moving through the woods, then another. They were coming from the north trail. Thomas reached under the table, pulled out a rifle, old bolt-action, his uncle's. He checked the chamber, loaded. Then he stepped outside. The air was cold, no moon, stars thick overhead. He moved into the trees without a sound. His boots found the soft earth between roots. His breathing was controlled, steady. He'd done this before, in places where a wrong step meant everything. The flashlight beams were closer now, voices, low and careless. Thinks he can just kick us out. Teach him a lesson. Thomas stopped behind a wide pine. 30 yards ahead he saw them. Dale, the younger man, a third he didn't recognize. They carried gas cans. His jaw tightened. He stepped out from the tree, raised the rifle, fired once into the air. The crack echoed through the valley like thunder. The 3 men froze. Thomas worked the bolt. The metallic sound cut through the silence. "Drop the cans," he said. His voice was calm, flat. Dale's head snapped toward the sound, but he couldn't see. The darkness was too thick. "Drop them," Thomas said again. The cans hit the ground. "Now walk back the way you came." "You're crazy," Dale said. His voice shook. "Walk." They stumbled backward, flashlights swinging wild. Then they turned and ran. Thomas listened until the sound faded. Then he walked forward and picked up the gas cans. The next morning, Sheriff Voller came back, alone this time. He parked at the clearing and got out slowly. Thomas was sitting on the porch. The rifle leaned against the wall beside him. Voller stopped at the bottom of the steps. He looked tired. "Got a call last night," he said. "Dale and his boys said you fired at them." "I fired over them," Thomas said. "They said you threatened them. They were carrying accelerant onto my property at 2 in the morning." Voller rubbed his face. "Look, I don't want this to escalate." "Then tell them to stay off my land." Voller stared at him for a long moment, then he sighed. "Who are you?" Thomas didn't answer. Voller shook his head. "I did some checking, your name, your service record." He paused. "You were a sniper, Marine Corps, 2-tour, decorated." Thomas's expression didn't change. Voller continued. "They sent you places most people don't come back from, and when you did come back," he trailed off, "you disappeared." "I didn't disappear," Thomas said quietly. "I just stopped mattering." Voller looked down. Dale doesn't know who he's dealing with. He doesn't need to know. He's not going to let this go. Then that's his problem. Voller stood there thinking, then he nodded. "I'll talk to him, but I can't make promises." "I'm not asking for promises." Voller turned to leave, then he stopped. "For what it's worth, thank you for your service." Thomas didn't respond. Voller got in his car and drove away. 11:32 p.m. The days passed. Thomas repaired the cabin, replaced rotted boards, cleared the chimney, fixed the roof. He worked slowly, carefully. He didn't rush. At night he sat by the fire and read his uncle's journal, page by page. There were stories in it about the mountain, about the animals, about silence. One entry stayed with him. "A man asked me once why I live up here alone. I told him I'm not alone. I'm just away from people who forgot how to be quiet." Thomas closed the journal and stared into the flames. 2 weeks later, the truck came back. But this time it was different. Only one vehicle, and it wasn't Dale's. Thomas stepped onto the porch. A man got out, older, white hair, clean jacket. He carried himself with the posture of someone who'd spent decades in uniform. He walked toward the cabin and stopped at a respectful distance. "Thomas Vance." Thomas nodded. The man extended his hand. "Colonel Raymond Marsh, retired. I was your co in Fallujah." Thomas hesitated, then he shook his hand. Marsh looked around. "Hell of a place." "It is." "Sheriff Voller called me, said you might be having some trouble." Thomas didn't answer. Marsh smiled faintly. "Voller and I served together, long time ago. He thought I should come up here, make sure you were all right." "I'm fine." Marsh nodded slowly. "I looked into the men giving you problems. Dale Pritchard, local hunter, thinks he owns these mountains because his family's been poaching here for 3 generations. I don't need help with him." I know you don't, Marsh said, but I figured I'd come anyway. He looked out at the valley. You know, after you left the Corps, we tried to find you, reach out, you just vanished. Thomas said nothing. Marsh continued. I always wondered why. You were one of the best we had, calm under pressure, never missed, never hesitated. I did my job. You did more than that, Marsh said quietly. You saved lives, a lot of them. Thomas looked away. Marsh studied him. What happened after you got back? Thomas was silent for a long time. Then he spoke. I came home, got a job, tried to fit in. He paused. But everything felt wrong. Too loud, too fast. People talked about things that didn't matter. He stopped again. I started sleeping outside, in my truck. Then I lost the truck after that, he trailed off. It just got easier to disappear. Marsh nodded. A lot of men go through that. You're not alone. I know, Thomas said, but it doesn't change anything. Marsh was quiet. Then he reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. This is a letter from the VA. It's a backlog settlement, benefits you were owed, disability, housing assistance. He held it out. Thomas didn't take it. I don't need charity. It's not charity, Marsh said firmly. It's what you earned, what you're owed. Thomas looked at the letter, then at Marsh. Slowly he took it. Marsh nodded. There's also a number on there, support line, people who understand what you went through if you ever want to talk. Thomas folded the letter and put it in his pocket. Marsh turned to leave, then he stopped. One more thing, Dale Pritchard. He's been asking around about you, trying to dig up dirt, spread rumors. Thomas's expression didn't change. Marsh continued. I made some calls, let a few people know who you are, what you did. Word spreads fast in small towns. He looked at Thomas. You won't have trouble from him again. Thomas met his eyes. I didn't ask you to do that. I know, Marsh said, but you didn't have to. He got in his truck and drove away. 3 days later, Thomas was checking the fence line when he heard voices. He moved toward the sound. At the edge of the clearing, he found them, Dale and the younger man. But they weren't trespassing. They were standing just outside the property line. Dale saw him and raised a hand, not aggressive, almost cautious. Thomas walked over. Dale cleared his throat. Look, we came to apologize. The younger man nodded. We didn't know who you were. Thomas said nothing. Dale shifted his weight. Colonel Marsh called me, told me about your service, what you did over there. He paused. I was out of line, way out of line, and I'm sorry. Thomas studied him. You came onto my land with gas cans. Dale looked down. I know it was stupid. I was angry, but that's no excuse. The younger man spoke up. We won't come back, you have our word. Thomas was silent. Then he nodded once. Dale let out a breath. Thank you. They turned to leave. Wait, Thomas said. They stopped. He looked at them. There's a trail on the north side, leads to a clearing. Someone left a deer carcass there, half butchered. Dale's face went red. That was us few weeks back. We got spooked, thought we heard a ranger. Thomas's jaw tightened. If you're going to hunt, do it right. Respect the animal, respect the land. Dale nodded quickly. Yes, sir, we will. Thomas watched them walk away. Winter came early that year. Snow fell thick and heavy. The cabin groaned under the weight. Thomas split wood every morning, kept the fire going, rationed the food he'd stocked. The isolation didn't bother him. He'd spent years surrounded by people and felt more alone than he did now. Here the silence had meaning. One evening, he sat by the fire and opened the letter from Marsh. He read through the details, the benefits, the back pay, the resources. It was more money than he'd seen in years. Enough to fix the cabin properly, maybe even winterize it. Enough to live. He folded the letter, and set it aside. Then he picked up his uncle's journal and opened it to the last page. There was one final entry, written in shaky handwriting. If you're reading this, you found the cabin. I'm glad. This place needs someone who understands silence, someone who knows the difference between being alone and being abandoned. Take care of it. It'll take care of you. Thomas closed the journal. He stared into the fire. Outside, the wind moved through the trees. Snow fell soft and steady. For the first time in years, he felt something close to peace. Spring came slowly. The snow melted, streams ran high and fast, wildflowers pushed through the mud. Thomas worked the land, cleared brush, repaired the old fence, planted a small garden near the cabin. People left him alone. Occasionally, he'd see hikers on the distant trails. He'd watch them from the porch, but he never approached. Once, a young couple got lost and stumbled onto his property. They were scared, cold. The man had twisted his ankle. Thomas brought them inside, made them tea, let them warm by the fire. He didn't ask questions, didn't make small talk. When they were ready, he walked them back to the main trail, showed them the way down. The woman thanked him. You saved us. Thomas shook his head. You would have found your way. But he watched until they disappeared down the mountain. One morning in late May, Sheriff Voller drove up again. He got out and walked to the porch. Morning, he said. Thomas nodded. Voller leaned against the railing. Came to tell you something. Dale Pritchard turned himself in, admitted to illegal hunting, spotlighting, trespassing. Thomas raised an eyebrow. Voller continued. Said he wanted to do the right thing, served 30 days, lost his hunting license for 2 years. Why are you telling me? Voller smiled slightly. Because he also started volunteering, wildlife conservation, trail maintenance, says he wants to give back. He paused. I think meeting you changed him. Thomas didn't respond. Voller looked out at the valley. You know, people around here talk about you. They call you the mountain man. Some say you're a ghost. Others say you're some kind of guardian. I'm just a man living on his land. Maybe, Voller said, but you've earned respect, real respect. He pushed off the railing. Anyway, just wanted you to know, you need anything, you call. Thomas nodded. Voller got in his car and left. Summer settled over the mountain. The cabin stood solid, the garden grew, the forest thrived. Thomas walked the trails every morning, not patrolling, just present. He saw deer, elk, once a bear at a distance. He never carried the rifle anymore, didn't need to. The mountain had accepted him. And he had accepted it. One evening, as the sun set behind the ridge, Thomas sat on the porch. The valley below was gold and green. The sky was layered with pink and orange. He thought about the years behind him, the places he'd been, the things he'd done. The wars, the silence after, the streets, the shelters. And now this. A home. He didn't say a prayer, didn't make a speech. He just sat and listened. The wind through the pines. The creek in the distance. The quiet. It was enough. Years later, hunters would still talk about the mountain. About the land near Coldwater Ridge. Some said it was haunted, others said it was protected. But no one went there without permission. And no one ever saw the old man who lived in the cabin. He became part of the stories, part of the mountain itself. A figure in the mist, a shadow in the trees. Not a ghost. Just a man who found his place in the world. And decided to stay.